I was 19 at the time, and I wasn't exactly proud of how I handled things back then. I argued with my parents a lot. Small things would turn into big explosions, and I always felt like I needed to prove a point, even when there wasn't really a point to prove. That day was one of those days. I had come home late after class, already in a bad mood, and within an hour we were yelling at each other again. I don't even remember what started it. Something stupid, probably. But it escalated fast, and before I knew it, my dad told me to leave and cool off somewhere else. I grabbed my hoodie, my phone, and walked out thinking I'd be back in an hour or two once things settled down. They didn't. I kept walking through the neighborhood, letting my frustration fade into exhaustion. By the time the sun started dropping behind the rooftops, I realized I had nowhere to go. My friends would have let me crash at their places, but I didn't want them calling my parents and turning this into some big dramatic rescue story. So I kept walking. That's when I remembered the old building near the edge of town. Everyone called it the Ridgeway Apartments, even though it had been abandoned for years. It was a small 4-story concrete block that had been half boarded up after a fire damaged the lower floor. Most people avoided it. Kids used to dare each other to go inside, but nobody really stayed long. I had been inside once before, years ago, just for fun. It wasn't collapsed or anything, just empty. Quiet in a strange way. I told myself I'd just stay there for the night. By the time I reached it, it was almost completely dark. The building looked worse up close. Graffiti on the walls, broken glass near the entrance, and the front gate hanging slightly open like it had given up trying to stay shut. I hesitated at the entrance longer than I expected to. Not because I was scared exactly, but because something about the place felt off. Like it wasn't just abandoned, like it was being avoided. Still, I went in. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. My footsteps echoed through the stairwell as I moved deeper into the building. The lobby still had old furniture pushed into corners, like someone had tried to clear it out halfway and then stopped caring. I decided to stay on the second floor, less exposed, easier to leave if I needed to. As I climbed the stairs, I kept hearing little sounds. Nothing clear, just faint creaks that could have been the building settling. At least, that's what I told myself. The second-floor hallway was long and empty. Doors lined both sides, most of them slightly open. I picked a room halfway down the hall and stepped inside. It was just an empty apartment. Dust everywhere, a broken mattress leaned against the wall, windows cracked but still intact. I dropped my backpack in the corner and sat down on the floor. For a while, it was almost peaceful. No cars, no voices, nothing. Just silence. Then, I heard a door close somewhere, below me. I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to recognize. A real sound. Not wind, not settling. A door. I stayed still, listening. Nothing else followed it. No footsteps, no voices. I slowly stood up and walked to the doorway of the apartment, peeking into the hallway. Empty. But the silence felt different now, like it had tightened. I waited maybe 5 minutes, then 10. I almost convinced myself it was just the building shifting. That's when I heard movement again, this time closer. Slow footsteps coming up the stairwell. I backed into the apartment immediately, pressing myself against the wall near the door, trying not to breathe too loudly. The footsteps reached the second floor and stopped right outside. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard a soft dragging sound, like someone adjusting their stance. Then, a voice. Hello? It was calm, controlled, almost friendly. I didn't answer. The voice spoke again, closer now. Maintenance. You shouldn't be in here at night. Something about the tone made my skin tighten. It wasn't quite natural, too steady, too rehearsed. I stayed silent. The footsteps shifted outside the door, slowly pacing. You can come out. I saw you come in. That wasn't possible. There was no one outside when I arrived. I would have noticed. Still, I didn't move. A few seconds passed. Then the voice changed slightly, lower, less patient. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." My heart started pounding harder. I looked around the room for anything I could use, even though I knew there was nothing. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something I didn't expect. A faint metallic click, like a key fitting into a lock. But this apartment didn't have a lockable door from the outside, at least not that I remembered. The handle slowly turned, and just as it started to open, I made a decision I didn't think through. I ran. I bolted through the back of the apartment towards the window, not even thinking about how high I was. I just needed out. Behind me, I heard footsteps inside the building, now faster than before. Not walking anymore, chasing. And that's when I realized something that made everything worse. There wasn't just one person inside that building. There were at least two, and neither of them sounded like they were trying to leave. I hit the lower roof hard, rolled once, and almost lost my grip on the edge. My leg flared up with a sharp pain, but I forced myself up anyway. There was no time to think about it properly. All I could hear was movement above me, inside the building, getting louder and more urgent. They weren't walking anymore. They were searching. I dropped down from the roof onto a narrow side alley between the abandoned building and a chain-link fence. The impact sent a jolt through my ankle, but I kept moving, limping forward as fast as I could manage. Behind me, I heard a window slam open. Then a voice again. "Hey!" That same calm tone, still controlled, still wrong somehow. I didn't turn back. I pushed through the alley and hit the street running, even though every step hurt more than the last. The neighborhood was mostly empty, just a few dim streetlights buzzing overhead. My breathing was so loud in my ears I could barely think. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. Nothing. For a second, I thought maybe I'd actually lost them. That relief lasted about 3 seconds. A figure stepped out from the side of the building. Not running, just standing there. And then another one appeared a few feet behind him. 2 silhouettes under the weak streetlight, both watching me without moving. One of them lifted an arm slightly, like he was about to wave or signal something, but stopped halfway through. I turned and ran again. I didn't know where I was going anymore, just away. That was the only thought in my head. After a few blocks, my legs started giving out. Every step felt heavier, slower. I ducked into a lit gas station and practically stumbled inside, grabbing onto the counter to stay upright. The cashier looked up at me immediately. "You okay?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out for a second. My throat felt tight, like my body hadn't caught up with what was happening yet. "There are people," I finally managed, "following me." He didn't question it. He just reached under the counter and picked up the phone. "Stay here," he said. That was the first time I actually stopped moving. I looked back outside through the glass doors. The street was empty again. No sign of them, no movement, just the usual quiet night like nothing had happened. But I knew what I saw. Police came about 10 minutes later. I gave them everything I could remember, but even while I was talking, I could hear how ridiculous it sounded coming out of my mouth. 2 men in an abandoned building pretending to be maintenance, voices changing, a locked door that shouldn't have locked. They went to check the Ridgeway apartments. When they came back, their expressions were different. Not alarmed, not confused, just flat. They told me the building was empty. No signs of recent entry, no broken locks, no movement on the cameras from nearby businesses. Nothing. One of them even said, "You might have just spooked yourself in an empty structure." But I knew what I heard, and I knew what chased me out. They drove me home later that night. My parents didn't ask too many questions. I think they were just relieved I was back. I didn't tell them everything. Not the voices, not the second one, not how the door opened from the outside when it shouldn't have. Because the worst part wasn't even what happened inside that building. It was what happened 2 days later. I was sitting in my room scrolling through my phone, trying to convince myself I had overreacted. That's when I got a notification, a photo sent to my old email account. No subject, no message, just an image. It was grainy, like it was taken from a distance of night. Streetlight glow, a blurry angle, but it was clear enough. It showed the entrance of the Ridgeway Apartments, and right in the center of the frame was me, standing inside the building, looking toward the camera. Except I knew that wasn't possible, because that photo was taken from outside, and I never stopped moving long enough for anyone to stand still and take it. I checked the timestamp. It was at the exact minute I first heard the footsteps. I deleted it immediately, blocked the email, tried to forget it. But sometimes, late at night, I still catch myself thinking about that moment when the voice said, "I saw you come in." And I wonder if that was actually true, or if something in that building had been watching me long before I ever walked inside. My name's George, and this happened when I was 17, during one of those long summer breaks where every day feels the same and boredom starts turning into bad decisions. My best friend at the time, Noah, and I were always looking for something to do. Not smart things, just anything that broke the routine of sitting around all day doing nothing. That's usually how trouble starts, looking back on it. There was a place outside our town that everyone knew about, but nobody really talked about in detail. An old property people called the Hollow Farm. It sat far out past the last row of houses, beyond the paved road where the asphalt turned into cracked gravel and eventually just stopped mattering altogether. The story was always the same. Old family, no one living there anymore. Land sold off and ignored. Some said it was used for storage at one point. Others said it had just been left to rot after a legal dispute. Nobody really knew for sure. What we did know was simple. It was abandoned, and it had been that way as long as we could remember. One afternoon, Noah showed up at my place with 2 flashlights and that look he always got when he had already decided we were doing something dumb. "You still down to explore that farmhouse or what?" he asked. I should have said no. I honestly don't even know why I didn't. Maybe because nothing ever happened in our town and the idea of something actually happening felt exciting in a way that didn't feel dangerous at the time. So, a few hours later, we were walking down an old dirt path behind the farmland, cutting through tall grass that scratched at our legs. The sun was starting to dip, and the air had that dry warmth that makes everything feel slightly unreal. We parked Noah's bike near a fence line and walked the rest of the way on foot. The farmhouse showed up slowly through the trees, like it was trying not to be seen until the last possible moment. When we finally got close enough, it didn't look dramatic or haunted like in movies. It just looked old. Weathered wood, sagging roof, windows dark and empty. But there was something about it that felt wrong in a quiet way. Not loud or obvious, just subtle enough that you notice your pace slowing without realizing it. Noah shined his flashlight toward the front porch. "Looks less scary than I thought," he said. I didn't agree, but I didn't argue either. The front door was already slightly open, hanging off its hinges like it had been left mid-motion years ago. That alone should have turned us around. We went inside anyway. The air was heavy, like it hadn't moved in a long time. Dust floated through our flashlight beams every time we stepped forward. The floor creaked under us, but it held. The inside wasn't empty in the way I expected. There were still remnants of life. A broken chair, a collapsed table, a shelf with nothing on it except stains that didn't make sense anymore. We moved slowly through the ground floor, calling out just to hear our own voices bounce back. No answer. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. At the base of the staircase, Noah stopped. "Do you see that?" he asked, quietly. I followed his flashlight upward. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. There was a faint glow coming from above, slipping through the cracks between the wooden steps. A dull, warm light like candlelight trapped in another room. But there shouldn't have been any electricity. Noah swallowed. "That's not normal." We both stood there for a few seconds, just listening. And that's when I realized something worse. No sound. Not wind through the walls, not insects, not even the usual settling of old wood. Just silence. Noah started up the stairs first, and I followed because stopping felt worse than moving forward. Each step made the wood groan softly under us, and with every sound, I expected someone to react. At the top of the stairs, there was a hallway with 3 doors, all closed. The light was coming from under the middle one. We didn't speak. We just looked at each other, trying to decide what made less sense, the light itself or the fact that nothing inside the house was responding to us being there. Noah reached the door first and placed his hand on the handle. He hesitated. Then he opened it. The door swung inward with a long, slow creak that felt louder than it should have been. Inside the room, there were people, at least 4 of them, kneeling, formed in a rough circle on the wooden floor. Their candles were placed between them, melting into uneven wax piles. The light we saw from outside came from those flames. None of them moved, not even when the door opened fully. Noah whispered, "Are they sleeping?" I couldn't answer, because I couldn't tell. Their heads were slightly lowered, faces hard to see in the dim light. They weren't tied up, they weren't restrained, they just stayed still. One of them had something in their hands, a small object I couldn't make out from where we stood. Noah took a step back. "We should go." But before either of us could move, one of them shifted slightly, not standing up, not turning fully, just enough for their head to tilt toward the door, like they knew we were there. And then another one followed. Slowly, one by one, they started to turn their attention towards us. No one spoke. The candles kept burning, and the room stayed quiet in a way that felt completely unnatural. We didn't wait for anything else to happen. The second Noah said run, we were already backing away from the doorway, but it didn't stay quiet for long. One of the candles flickered violently, like a draft had suddenly moved through the room, even though there were no open windows up there. Then came a sound I still can't properly place. Not a shout, not a scream, more like a collective shift. Fabric moving, knees lifting off wood, a slow, synchronized rise that didn't match how human movement should sound. We turned and bolted. Down the hallway first, then the stairs. Our footsteps were loud, too loud, bouncing off the walls and filling the house in a way that made it feel like we were announcing ourselves to everything inside it. Behind us, something changed. The silence broke. Not with words, but with movement. Rapid, uneven footsteps now coming from the upstairs hallway. Not one set, multiple, scattering at different speeds like they weren't coordinated anymore. Noah was ahead of me, almost slipping on the last few steps as he hit the ground floor. We reached the front door at the same time, practically crashing into it. It didn't open easily. For a second, my brain refused to accept that. It had been open when we came in. I remembered it clearly. Hanging loose, swinging slightly. Now it felt heavier, like it had shifted. Noah shoved it harder. It gave, but only halfway, scraping against the frame like something was resisting it from the other side. That's when I heard it behind us. A voice. Not loud, not dramatic. Just one word, spoken from the top of the stairs. Don't. Noah froze for half a second, just long enough for me to feel my stomach drop. Then we both pushed through. The door finally swung open and we stumbled out into the yard, hitting cold air so suddenly it felt unreal. We didn't stop running until the farmhouse was fully behind us, swallowed by trees again. Even then, we kept going. Branches slapped against our arms and faces as we ran through the overgrowth, not caring anymore about noise or direction. We just wanted distance. At some point, Noah slipped and fell hard into the dirt. I turned back to help him up, and that's when we both looked at the house again. It was quiet. Too quiet. No lights, no movement, no footsteps. Just the same old abandoned farmhouse sitting there like nothing had happened inside it. Noah was breathing hard. What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. We walked the rest of the way out in silence, both of us constantly checking over our shoulders even when nothing was there to see. When we finally got back to town, we didn't tell anyone right away. Not because we made some pact, but because it felt impossible to explain without sounding insane. A few days passed before we talked about it again. When we did, Noah was quieter than usual. He said something that stuck with me more than anything else from that night. It didn't feel like we interrupted them. It felt like we were expected. I didn't like that thought, so I pushed it away. We never went back. But the story doesn't really end there. About a week later, I drove past the area with my dad without thinking much about it. I wasn't even looking for the farmhouse. It just happened to be on the route. Except it wasn't there anymore. The field was still there, the trees, the same dirt path cutting through the edge of the land. But the house was gone. No foundation, no debris, no sign it had ever been standing there at all. I told myself it had been demolished. Maybe the county finally cleaned it up. But when I asked around later, nobody could confirm that. No permits, no construction work, nothing. Noah still doesn't talk about it either. I tried once, and he just went quiet for a long time before saying, "Some places don't want to stay seen." I don't know what that farmhouse was, but I know we didn't find it by accident. And I know whatever was inside it that night didn't look surprised to see us.